What I wanted to do today is just to tell you a little bit about a study that I've been conducting in Hollywood about the writing process in television. And these are the 3 steps that I'll take. I'll try to be as organized as possible because that's what the reputation is here in Sweden, right? You're very organized, and so I try to be even more organized than I am usually. So first I'm going to explain to you what I did, what the study was. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the process of writing television in the United States, specifically in Hollywood. And then I'm going to answer 5 questions. And the questions are, first, I have a little trouble. I have to walk around with this thing because I'm not used to being behind anything. Okay. Why use a writer's room in the first place? I tried to figure out what you might be most interested in the data that I have. And I'll be happy to talk to you about other things later if you want. You can just let me know. But secondly, do all programs use a writer's room? That's something that I didn't know when I started. What are the good characteristics? What are the characteristics of a good writer's room? What makes it a place where people can be creative and are happy? And how have writers' rooms changed or not over the years? So those are the first 4 questions. The 5th, if we have time, I'm going to talk about what are the politics of the writer's room, which I think is all kinds of interesting, and I hope you do too. Okay, the study. I conducted interviews over the course of several years with 45 television writers. And they were at various stages in their careers, from what they call a baby writer, and they call themselves the baby writers, the baby writer all the way up to executive producer, show creator. I interviewed people in comedy and in drama, and I interviewed more or less an even number of women and men. The data that I'm drawing on for this presentation is, are the transcripts from the interviews that I did. And I'm going to give you representative quotes from those interviews. Personally, I think the quotes are the most interesting part because you can draw so much out of them. But I have to say, all the quotes are going to be anonymous. I can't tell you who said it or what show they work for because I promised them I would not. I'm just going to identify them by their job title, by whether they're male or female, MRF, and by whether they do comedy or drama. Okay, the process, just a brief overview here. A showrunner, once a show is cleared, the pilot has been accepted, it goes to series, the showrunner hires a staff. And the staff in Hollywood, from what I've been told, can be between, say, 8 and 10 writers for comedy and more or less 5 to 8 in drama. Those numbers are probably a little high now because the staffs have been shrinking a little bit due to budget constraints. From the staff writer is the lowest rung, and the highest rung is the executive producer / showrunner. And showrunner is, I think, not a particularly imaginative title because it means the person who runs the show, but yeah, that's what they call it. It's the showrunner. They start early on with meetings with the entire staff, and what they do is they talk about what's going to happen in the entire first season. And they'll look at the direction of the stories, they'll look at the character arcs, and just sort of generally outline what's going to happen. And this takes several weeks. They'll continue to break stories, and that phrase, if you haven't heard it before, that just means breaking down into separate events, everything that's going to happen in the episodes. And then the showrunner assigns one writer or maybe a partnership of writers that counts as one in the writer's room to do a beat sheet. And the beat sheet is basically setting down all of those events in that particular episode. Okay? And then that beat sheet goes on for approval to the studio and then to the network. Now, something that I think is kind of interesting and a little bit funny is that Hollywood has its own way of speaking, its own kind of lingo. And when executives at the studio or the network write their comments, they're called notes, right? Now, to my knowledge, nowhere else is the term notes given to comments, not in academia, nothing. So sometimes what you'll see on a television show is that people will use the lingo of Hollywood. And I hear very often now when I'm watching TV, oh, thanks for that note. Oh, can you give me notes on that? And that's what it means, right? It's just taken from their lingo because that's their world. That's what how they talk. The outline is next, just a more developed version of the beat sheet into an outline. Also has to go through the same approval process. And then finally, you get to the first draft of the script. Now you can see in those last 3 points that there's a lot of input into every script, and everybody thinks differently. So it's really kind of a negotiation sometimes between the writers and the executives. And I can tell you, because the writers told me this over and over again, that they know who the executives are at the studio and the network who are just really, really good at giving notes, and they so appreciate that, because then they can work with that person. That person is going to respect their creative vision, but at the same time give them direction so that the script will go through. So we've gotten to the first draft of the script. All right, then it changes between comedy and drama, and it changes very significantly. In comedy, the first draft is what's called tabled. And what that means is, I'm the writer, I write my first draft, I bring it to the room and sort of literally put it on the table. And everyone comments on it, right? Which is kind of hard if you're a writer, I imagine. And this quote sort of summarizes it. I had many like this. By the end, you're lucky if anything you've written remains. Okay. I was told that if you have 10% of what you wrote in a script at the end in a comedy, that's really good. Okay, that's not a lot, right? Someone else, and I loved the metaphor, said, it's so often that I go in and I give them a sweater and they put a ball of yarn on the air. So that's sort of difficult for the writers, but they know that that's the process. In drama, it's much more common that the writers will work alone, and they'll deal, once they have that script, they'll work on it and they'll work with the showrunner in getting that script ready for prime time, so to speak. There's a writer's assistant in the room, a very important person. It's the only non-writer who has access to the room. That person takes notes on everything that's said in the room. This is both in comedy and in drama. And what this does is it frees the writers to concentrate on ideas. So this, poor person sitting at the computer, like taking everything down, and then when a writer says, okay, what did we talk about half an hour ago? Going back through and saying, oh yeah, this is what we had. So the writer's assistant, very important person. I didn't want to leave them out of the mix here. Okay, why use a writer's room? All right, first, collaboration facilitates the exchange of ideas, right? And secondly, it ensures that writers don't spin their wheels. The quote that I chose to kind of summarize this is 1 + 1 = 4. You get a bunch of very smart people together in a room, they're all pitching ideas. With all the problems that it may cause, it really does generate a lot of creativity. And it also keeps the process moving because everyone knows what's going on. So it's not me going off and writing my little script and then somebody else goes off and writes their little script and then I say, oh, wait a minute, you mean that person dies in your script? Maybe I need to do something differently. Okay, so it really ensures that they're using their time well. The third reason is that the speed of production demands it. All right, in Hollywood, you have to keep those episodes coming, right? And if you don't, it's very expensive for everybody involved. The quote, with other people, you can come up with cooler stuff, and also it goes faster, because under all the deadlines, you need more than one person coming up with everything. Right? You can't possibly do it. And I have examples of when it didn't work, but I'm not going to give them here. I can give them to you if you're interested in hearing them later. Fourth, the institutional memory is preserved with a writer's room. Okay? Even if someone quits, moves on to another show, creates another show, there's a group of people who still know what's going on. Very important. Especially with plot-driven shows and where there are character arcs. You have to be in the room with all the writers so that everyone knows what is going on. It's much easier with other people talking back and forth to come up with cool plot twists and turns instead of sitting by yourself in your office. Now, the person that told me this was on a program that you all know. It's not on the air anymore, but it had so many cool plot twists and turns. It was incredible. And he was saying that the only reason that they could do that was that they had all these minds working on it. Consistency, another important factor in writing series television. Shows that use writers' rooms do better because you are all on the same page. You know, sometimes you watch TV shows and you can tell that different episodes were written by different people, and some you can't. And when you can't, it's better when it all sounds like one voice. Now, the sort of holy grail, at least from the showrunner's perspective, the kind of holy grail in series television is that everyone writes to the showrunners or the show creators' vision, right? So it's like one voice. Now, it doesn't always work, but if the showrunner is very good and trains people very well, that's what's going to happen. 6, personal rewards for writers. And I thought this was very interesting, that working in a room really has its own benefits for the people who write the programs. And being in a writer's room, though there is a lot of it that is very junior high and awful, and we'll get to that, it's also a lot of smart, fun people trying to make people laugh. And there are a lot of times when you go, really? This is what we get paid for? There are a lot of things about it that make it an unbelievable job, you know. And 7, it's an efficient way to communicate. Using a room gives the showrunner a good way, an efficient way to really let everyone know what he or she wants. Okay? You build a family and they learn what the showrunner wants. If I have to meet with 6 writers individually and explain myself 6 times, it's just ridiculous. And if that ever happens, that's a very poorly run show. Okay, next question. Do all programs use a writer's room? Right? Most do, but there are differences between comedy rooms and drama rooms, and I think this was very, very significant. The differences reflect both a different style of working and also different personalities, right? And different goals of drama and comedy as well. Okay, there's a timer here I need to be aware of. Okay. I loved this quote. This is from a person in drama, has done some very good shows that I'm sure you've seen. Some people like the room. I have friends who like the room. I hate it because to me, I became a writer because I like going off by myself and writing. Being in the room is just my idea of hell. Right. So that's from a drama writer. Okay. Now, in contrast to that, to me, collaboration is one of the reasons I write television and not novels. I think a lot of great things, a lot of fun things come out of collaboration. I enjoy spending part of my day in a writer's room. I think the downside of that is the rewrite process, tabling. I hate tabling the writer's work. Another reason there's a big difference, right, is that a comedy series requires an active writer's room to generate just the constant flow of jokes that's needed, because the structure now in U.S. comedy, and I'm not saying I like it, but the structure now is just joke, 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 joke. So you have to have a lot of people working on that, or you're not going to have that kind of structure maintained. Okay, what are the characteristics of a good room, right? What the writers themselves describe as a good room. It starts with the showrunner's hiring process. Okay. And this from a very seasoned showrunner who wrote some really big classic hits in the 80s. I learned how to cast a room much like you cast a show. So thinking of the writers as actors, and you're casting them to work together in this performance in a certain way. And a good staff and a mediocre staff is the difference between going home at 8 o'clock and going home at midnight. Or later. A good room is a room where the personalities mesh, where they work well together. You meet people, you read their work, but you meet them and you say, is this someone I can stand to be in a room with 8 or 9 hours a day? And is this someone who can work the way I work? So you have both the personalities and also this vision thing. Can this person work with me as the showrunner? The whole chemistry of the writer's room can change with just one person. I love this one. Bad staffs are incredibly painful. You are in a room with people who are either horrible or nasty or stupid. And you are just in the room all the time with them, and you have to interact with them all the time, and you can't really say, I wish you would just shut up, you are so stupid. Now, obviously, this person had some bad experiences on some shows. She has worked on many shows, but she had some bad experiences, as many of them have. A good room has a range of skills represented. So you wanted solid sort of script writers there. You also wanted some guys. This is an older person who worked mostly with guys. That were just maybe never write a script, an episode of the show, but were really joke craftsmen. Sometimes these guys were terrible at being storytellers, but they could deliver the huge joke. Now this was something that kind of surprised me, because I thought what you want in a room is just all of these fantastic writers, but not necessarily. You also need idea people who may not be able to write as well, especially in comedy. A good room is a safe place. This was a constant theme that came up in my interviews. But I think writers do draw a lot from their own experience, so you do need to feel like you can be frank and open, not abusive to other people, but you can feel free to talk about your own personal experiences without being attacked. Right? Very important. Especially to the women, but also to the men. And I heard multiple stories about breakups with girlfriends and boyfriends because the girlfriend or the boyfriend saw their story on television and got really angry, right? So a lot of this stuff that you see on TV is stuff that really happened to people, and they're a little sensitive about it. Okay. All right, 4. A good writer's room is a place where writers don't censor themselves, right? And this person, who also had a bad experience on a major comedy that you know, I didn't feel very connected to a lot of those writers, so I didn't feel the need to necessarily open up. This person got fired from that show because she's very creative, excellent writer, but she didn't feel comfortable with that group of people in saying, okay, well, this happened to me and maybe we could use this and whatever. She just didn't feel comfortable. So she censored herself. Now this is something that I'm just starting to think about in my research, but it came up just a couple of times in the interviews, but writers seem to appreciate intelligent boundaries. Okay, so yes, you don't want to censor yourself, but you do want some kind of framework within which to work, right? I disagree that hindrances necessarily create lack of freedom. I actually think hindrances create freedom. And this person is a showrunner on a multiple Emmy-winning television program. Skilled showrunner, critical for a good writer's room. And I heard many stories about excellent showrunners, and I heard many stories about really not so good showrunners. The executive producers, or showrunners, are really so great about time management and about letting people tell their stories and letting people get off track, because sometimes that feeds the story that you're working on. But they also have an incredible ability to keep things really well paced. Right? That is a really skilled showrunner. I heard a story about one showrunner who liked to write everything themselves and had these, it was a drama, so it was probably 6 people in the room, right? These incredibly smart, well-paid people sitting in a room, and the showrunner just wasn't there most of the time. And they would work on something, the showrunner would come back and say, okay, what have you got? They'd pitch it, and he would say, I don't like it, keep working. So that was not a good experience. They need the direction, and they need to be on target with the time. All right, how have writers' rooms changed or not? This is a question that I'm very interested in pursuing. First, the culture now in writers' rooms in Hollywood seems to be harsher than it used to be. And I'm going to give you 3 quotes here. The first one is from a writer who worked on comedies, classic comedies, in the 1970s and the 1980s. So a woman. There was never any hostility. There was nothing but encouraging and complimenting each other and helping each other work out a story, right? So this program, on the air in the 1980s, still on the air all over the place in the United States. And this from a showrunner from a classic 1980s and 1990s sitcom. Writers typically come from pretty dysfunctional backgrounds. And so I think there is a level of sarcasm that is often high in the room. But my experience in our writers' rooms were that they were not mean or vicious, all right? Vicious. Okay, now this is someone who has heard about rooms that were mean and vicious, okay? And now we're going to talk about those. But anyway, so you can see a little bit of a difference, right? Not necessarily the encouraging writer's room that we had on the previous slide. And from a showrunner at a hit comedy in the late 1990s, early 2000s. The room I'm in now is certainly the meanest room I've ever been in. Over the years, I've seen rooms getting harsher and meaner and certainly more sexual as they are younger and younger. Okay, now these are all comedies, right? With lots of people, lots of smart people pitching jokes. Right? It feels like high school in that room. It is ultimately like high school. It's a big group of people who really want to be liked by others. It's a popularity contest. Right? Heard this in many different versions. Right? I have heard horror stories of just mean, sexually abusive, not physically, but like things they say, drawings, sexual drawings of people, just mean, just terrible behavior. I have not ever been in those rooms. Right? So this person, lucky, but has a lot of friends. Okay. Racial and gender diversity hasn't changed enough. As I will talk about what has changed and what has not. Many of the people that I interviewed said there still is a very much entrenched culture that hasn't really developed. And this is, I loved this. The writer's room sort of runs a big spectrum from young white male to older white male. That's my experience. Okay. All right, we do have time, good. What are the politics of the room? Right? The room is hierarchical, very hierarchical. There is a hierarchy in the room, and there are generals, and there are colonels, and lieutenants, and sergeants, and privates. You have to kind of know your place. That's a very weird way to create. Okay? Now, this person, I'll just tell you a little background story. This person told me that when she was earlier in her career as a staff writer, she actually pitched an idea when the showrunner wasn't there, right? And since it's hierarchical, right? If the showrunner is not there, the next person takes over, right? The next ranked person. So the second in command heard the pitch and didn't like it. Said, no, we're not going to do that, whatever. So hours later, the showrunner comes back, and this woman, thinking, damn, I had a good idea, says, I'm going to pitch this, and she pitches it to the showrunner again. Well, when it came time to renew the contracts, she got a phone call from the showrunner. Not from the second in command, but from the showrunner. And the showrunner said, you know, you really have to respect the hierarchy. And when my second in command, whatever we called him, said that that was not a good idea, you need to respect that. And I'm renewing your contract this time. Right? But don't do it again. Okay, so there really is, there's a set of, and in some other work that I've done, I've really developed kind of what the set of rules are in that hierarchy. There are definitely a lot of politics because you have to impress a lot of people. The showrunner, anyone above you, the studio, the network, everyone is jockeying to get their idea as the idea that goes. You know, like, let's do this story or let's do it this way or whatever, so they could take credit for it. Okay? So it's very competitive in that writer's room. And again, especially in comedy, but also in drama. And someone actually told me, I didn't use the quote here, but someone told me that, you know, when it comes to insulting people, right, there's sarcasm in the room, kind of mean, kind of harsh. When it comes to insulting people, you can insult people below you, but you can't insult up, right? So another person said that she made the mistake once of insulting up, and she made a very, very funny joke, and everybody was just like, oh, and nobody said anything. And she said, oops, all right. The room is characterized by freedom of expression, and that has good and bad sides, and we'll talk about a lot of this. You cannot work without being able to say anything you want to. You just can't. You can't go in and tell a writer to turn off 15 parts of their brain and be really careful what they say. But now let's pitch things. It's like tying a runner's feet and telling him to run really fast. Okay? So this kind of quote, everyone had, right? I need to be able to speak. Other people need to be able to speak. Now, this was the case even with women who then told me, oh, the room is really mean and harsh and I hate it and I feel, you know, diminished, et cetera, et cetera. But they said, but they need to be able to speak. You need to be able to say whatever you want to say. If you are even thinking for a second, oh, I shouldn't say that, the moment is gone. The pace is so fast that you have to, the second it comes into your head, if you don't say it, the moment is gone and somebody else finds it, or the moment has changed. That's just the nature of the industry. I mean, even, and this was a primetime family program, was very sexist, and you are usually only like 1 or 2 women. It's just in any other industry you could say this is harassment, sexual harassment. But in this industry it is not the case because it is just everywhere. It is pervasive. It is something that you know comes with the territory. This blew me away, right? When I started hearing things like this, that it's just, I mean, that's the way it is. Right? So what has happened over the years in Hollywood is that women and racial minorities, I think too, although I don't have examples of them saying this so far in my interviews, will say that, you know, I have to suck it up, right? It's just the way it is. I have to conform to that if I want to be in that environment. I had a sexual harassment case if I wanted one, but you don't work. So the question becomes, do you want to work in this field? Because there has to be a great enough ease. I think that's true too. You've got to be one of the guys. Writers accept this as part of the business. And this was a good metaphor, I thought. You don't become a professional football player and then sue because someone tackled you. Okay. So that is the mindset not only of the guys, but also of the women. And I think, personally, I think this is a really interesting area to talk more about because both sides have very good points to make about the openness and then about, oh, well, but wait a minute, you know, people are being really insulted. Okay. But they do speak up. Now we're going to think about this quote for a minute. I have my limits. I don't like racist jokes, violence against women, not funny, and disgusting. Oh, and the exposed body parts that I maybe don't want to see. I put the kibosh on that too. And I was like, oh, that's where you draw the line, exposed body parts? And she said, yeah. And I said, so you do have to deal with that? Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's a little extreme. However, almost everyone used the metaphor of a family for the writer's room. But they said, since it is its own dysfunctional family, right? So it's a family, but it's got its problems, but it works. But we are such a dysfunctional family. We are a functional, dysfunctional family. A functional, dysfunctional family. All right, now Andrea suggested that we leave a lot of time for comments and discussion, so I have done that. This is me again, if you haven't gotten it so far, with my email address, and I hope to be able to talk to a lot of you at lunch and throughout the day if you have questions for me or want to see more work. I have an article coming out about this in March in the Journal of Broadcasting and Electronic Media, and I'm continuing to do this research, so if you are a television writer, I'm going to seek you out because I would love to do a comparison of this with what happens in Nordic television, because I am not familiar with Nordic television yet, right? So I may stalk you. All right, so comments, questions?
Do I also have sound? Oh, yeah, perfect.
Okay.
I think we have a lot of writers here in the room, so please just raise your hand.
What I usually tell my students when I do this, because nobody in a classroom, kids, they're 18, 19 years old, nobody wants to be the, oh, pick me. So they don't raise their hands, and I say, I have a very high tolerance for silence. And then we sit there, and somebody asks.
I could actually start with a question. When you were talking about the hierarchy. You were also talking about getting credit. And I wanted to know a little bit more about that. So is it so that it's only the showrunner or the one that is just below the showrunner that gets all the credit, even if it's someone low that comes up with the joke or plot twist?
That's a very good question. A good showrunner will give the credit to the staff, to whoever comes up with these ideas. There are showrunners who don't. And their thinking is, well, I made it to the top. I'm responsible for hiring these people. This is my show. Okay? The credits that you see, if you look, when you watch American television, the credits that you see seem to go on and on and on and on. You've got the producer, the supervising producer, the story editor, all kinds of producer credits in the front. Those are all writers. And the last one that says written by is the person who actually is getting credit for that script. Now, I have heard stories about showrunners who put their name on every script and somebody else, right? So a staff writer writes the script, but the showrunner and the staff writer are on it. That has monetary repercussions because the person who writes it gets paid, right? Everybody gets paid something every week, right? But then when you write a script, you get a whole lot more money the first time that it airs and the second time that it airs. So if two names are on there, you get half the money, right? So it depends on the showrunner very much. Yeah, but a good showrunner in a good room will give people credit and really help people move along. Another thing I haven't talked about much that may interest you is the whole idea of mentoring. And many people told me that in the old days, which is scary for me to hear because I remember the old days, there was really a great system of mentoring. And people, showrunners, from the 80s would really help people move along and get them jobs and help them improve their writing. And people so far that I've interviewed have said that there's not really a lot of that in Hollywood right now. And I haven't figured out yet whether it's just that the system has changed enough so that it's just not possible, or whether the kinds of people or the pressures that are on people prevent them from being mentors. I don't know.
A follow-up question to my last one about the credit. Is there a difference between the official and the unofficial credit? Like, people in the business know that, oh, it was that guy who came up with that joke, but it's still someone else's name.
Hollywood is a very, very small community. It's a very small community. And pretty much anything...
It's pretty small here as well.
Yeah.
Everyone's in this room.
Everybody's in the room. Pretty much everything that you say is going to get back to somebody. So if you disparage something that happens in the room, that showrunner is going to find out about it somehow. Somebody is going to tell them, is going to hear it, and it's going to come back on you. So I would say that in Hollywood, the writers don't complain a lot to each other, unless it's a really, really good friend. Or at least this is the impression I'm getting so far with the 45 interviews, right? Because you have to be very careful what you say. And you're not going to be so respected if you're known as the person who's like always crying about receiving credit, right? You have to kind of wait your turn. Does that answer that?
And do you always have to go just one place up, or can you jump like several if you're really, really talented when you come in first?
I mean, you can jump. That's not the typical way to do it. I was talking to somebody the other day and explaining that sometimes what can happen is a person can create a show, a great show, and sell it to a network, right? And so they're the show creator, they're the top dog, right? However, they have never run a show before. So the studio will probably bring in a seasoned showrunner to run that show. So it's really kind of the showrunner show, but the creator is still there. Sometimes after a while, the creator is fired. Right? So the show starts running, goes on, and then suddenly the creator's not on it anymore. Now that's the reason that I think of that is you're talking about skipping steps. The creator might not be a good television writer, or maybe a great television writer, but not be able to do all the managerial tasks involved in being a showrunner. And I think that's really important. That if you're a writer, if you're a solitary writer, you just have to manage your own time, right? But if you're a showrunner, you are a writer, and you have to manage everybody's time, and not just all the writers' time. You are the person who has to answer the questions from the costume department. Right? You are the person who has to answer the questions from all of the people working on the show in whatever capacity it is. The buck stops here is the expression in English. I'm sure you have one in your various languages that is exactly the same. But the buck stops with the showrunner.
We have a question here first.
Yes,
I can just repeat it in the mic. So.
Okay.
I'll just repeat the question because we're filming.
Thank you.
He wanted to know if the culture has become more harsh inside the writers' room because the culture in general has become more harsh, or why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's a very complex answer to that, and I don't have it yet. The factors that I think are influencing the harshness of the writers' room are the pressures of keeping something on the air, and you have to do well very quickly now. So if your show isn't getting the ratings, you're in trouble in 3 episodes. Okay? So people have a lot of pressure on them. All right, so they're just really trying anything. So I think that's probably one of the reasons. Yes, the culture has become more harsh, but that's kind of it's intertwined with the room becoming more harsh, because you see the kind of humor that you see on television now, I think, is very mean in a lot of programs. You would not want to know those people in that sitcom. So is that influencing how kids treat each other? I think it really is. Right? So whether it's the television influencing the culture, or the culture influencing the people who are going into television, I think it's a little bit of both. And there are probably other factors that I haven't kind of teased out yet, but those are 2. I think one of the quotes that I showed you, where a showrunner said that he was now in the meanest room. By the way, he was on one of the funniest comedies. Right? I mean, it was funny. Right? And he said he's seen rooms getting younger and younger. So I think the youth is also kind of is problematic in that sense, is making it more harsh. Yeah, there's kind of a cult of youth in Hollywood that I think is really not good. Many people told me that, they're, say, 40 years old. I mean, you are an old person at 40 in Hollywood, very old. But think about it. At 40, think of the experiences that you've had that you can bring to television. Think of the experiences that you've had that you can bring to that writer's room. Okay? You are probably a little more civilized, right, than 22-year-old kids who are coming out and really hungry and want to move, right? So I think that's probably it. Does that answer your question adequately? Yes. Okay.
Then we had one over there.
Okay, so
I'll just repeat the question.
Keep
it
forgetting.
was about the time frame. How much time do they have to write
Yes.
one episode?
Okay,
Or
the whole
no,
series.
just the whole season. You can answer all the.
I mean, it varies, but
different
I'll
ones.
give you an example of what was explained to me for one program. Right, the writing step. Say the program is going to premiere on television in September, which used to be the way it is. It's not always now, but say it's going to premiere in September. The showrunner will get the staff together in, say, April, and start talking about the show and where it's going and the character arcs that I mentioned earlier, etc. And they will work through, they'll get the first episode written by maybe end of May, June, right? And then after that, it's just a marathon that you have. Sometimes, if you're very lucky, you will get 8 days to shoot a program, but you better have that next program in the works already. Okay? Now, I have to say that the people that are here that are going to talk to you from Fox could answer that question in much more detail if you want to ask that, because they deal actually with the shows. But from what I saw, that's how it is. Yes, follow up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is there a difference between comedy and drama?
Much.
Because
yes, I'm sorry.
I saw 6 Days to Air. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's a documentary about how Trey Parker and Matt Stone do South Park, which is absolutely crazy. Because they create each show. It airs on Tuesday, and they start on Wednesday creating next week's episode, and that's an animated show.
Yeah.
So they actually have 6 days to do each episode, compared to Simpson that has like 100 days for one.
Yeah, it varies by program, certainly. What I just described to you was a drama, and that was a drama. I spent a summer at a drama series, watching all of this unfold, and that's what I know best. But for sitcoms, it is very different, because if you're doing, say, a 3-camera, 4-camera sitcom, you're going to have a live audience. And so your show, let's say your show is going to be on Friday night, it's actually taped on Friday night in front of the audience. So you have basically that week. Okay, so they will do all of the writing, the rewrites, the rehearsals, everything to come up to that Friday. So it's a big difference between comedy and drama.
And they do generally.
Thank you.
3 weeks on. They do 3 episodes, then they go down for a week so the writers can catch up. And they do 3 weeks, and then they go down for another week, and they repeat that pattern. They usually start shooting beginning of August and then wrap in.
And this is sitcoms only? Okay.
Okay, so
That's a sitcom. Yeah.
so this was the
Thank you.
senior vice president of Fox, Nancy Cotton, that said it goes in 3 episode frames, kind of generally 3 episodes, then 1 week. So is that the reason why they sometimes cancel shows after 3 episodes? No.
Just a happy coincidence.
Just a happy coincidence. Okay, we had a question there.
I'm curious about the incitements between the Nordic countries and Hollywood. Because if the harsh environment is means harsh and harsher rules, there must be not only the human mind acting. I mean, what are the incitements for the people breaking it? Because in the Nordic countries, if you get sort of famous writers, they keep on working, they keep on getting the same kind of salaries.
Uh-huh.
Like people are running after them on the streets.
Yes.
So what is happening with these people? Why are they getting so over-eager and mean to each other?
Yeah, so what's the thing, why do they get meaner? What's the incitement to become harsher?
I think part of it is the competitiveness, that you need to perform, right? Part of it is just the guy's culture, and I'm going to be a guy's guy, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to, just talk locker room, right?
So it's not money.
I don't think so, because from what I've been told, right, in the 80s and early 90s, okay, there was even more money for the creators of shows and the executive producers of shows. But when you say money, I'm thinking, is there too much money, right? Are you saying, is there too little?
No, I'm
Mon-
asking if that's one of the reasons they get harsher and harsher, because they want to get to the top and harsher.
Okay,
Like
yeah.
The payment afterwards is not only fame and guys, it's also money.
Yeah, I think it's the competitive, I want to win kind of thing, but because there's a lot of money. I mean, writers are very well paid, still in Hollywood, even though they were paid more, relatively in the 80s. But they're still very well paid. So it's really about competition and winning. People told me that, some people told me that they have made a lot of money and they can't spend it all, right, when they're at the top. So it's not just about money. But that's my personal opinion. That's not something that I have, all this data to support, but I don't think so.
Åsa?
I have a question for you. What's the typical or the background of the writers? Where do they come from? What's the education?
I'll just repeat. I'm trying to get the sound into the camera. What's the typical background of the writers? What kind of education? Where did they come from?
A lot of writers went to Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale. There's a very huge contingent of writers from Northwestern University, because it's a network kind of thing. So you're hiring in people people from your alma mater. So there's kind of that educational background for a lot of them. However, it varies. The range is huge in how people have gotten into the business, what their background is. Some of them studied sociology, some of them studied history, some of them, didn't know that they wanted to be writers until they were 30, right? So it really is very different. The one consistent thing that I found in my interviews was the whole idea of dysfunctional. That a lot of writers, and this makes sense, right, just in sort of a common sense kind of way, that a lot of writers start writing because they have issues that they need to work out. And they bring those issues with them when they come to Hollywood, and they're writing those issues and writing what's on their mind, what they're working through. And I could give you examples of situations that are in shows that are exactly the situation of the writers that wrote them. Difficult situations, things that they, trouble between, father and son. If you watch closely to American television, you will see a lot of issues with parents. A lot of issues with parents. And the parent is almost never right. Now that comes from someplace, right? That comes from an experience that they're kind of working out. So anyway, and writers themselves will tell you this.
And that's of course also related to the age question, because you can't have issues with your kids if you're 25.
Yeah, you can't have issues with your kids if you're 25. That's right, but you have issues with your parents when you're 25. Yeah, very good.
There.
Did you find anywhere where they were trying to set up the writers' room differently, or trying new ways of putting together people in a room, or doing it in a different way?
Did you find any place where they tried to do it differently to set up the people in the room, the writer's room?
There are a lot of ways to interpret that question, whether it's like the process or the tone of the room. Do you have anything specific in mind?
No, I was just wondering when you were talking about this harsh, mean environment.
Yes.
If someone was trying to reacting to that and trying a different way.
I would say that there are showrunners, and I met a lot of them, who don't allow that in their rooms. All right. There was one female showrunner who doesn't allow a lot of things in her room, but it all depends on the showrunner. If the showrunner allows it, it goes. Right.
But did you see a difference between female and male showrunners in this?
It's interesting because there's not a lot, there aren't enough female showrunners to make a really good comparison, and a lot of the female showrunners that I met were in drama. So I can't really speak to that. I don't know whether a female showrunner in a comedy room would have a different tone in the room. I'm not really sure.
We've talked a lot about gender. What about ethnical background? Is it mostly just white males, and is there a difference if the person has another kind of background?
I had another quote here that I took out just for the sake of time, so we'd have more discussion time. But one showrunner told me, it's very awkward to acknowledge the racism in Hollywood, but it's there. And he said, I don't think anyone would be denied a job because of their race, but it would change the dynamic in a lot of writers' rooms, because we would think, all right, we can't make those jokes about African Americans anymore because we're going to have to censor ourselves on that, right?
But maybe could be a good thing.
And I say, yeah, I mean, I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. I think some censorship, I think there's a lot of censorship that needs to happen in Hollywood, you know, self-censorship. I think people do need to, you know, create a different environment, because some people are just kept out of it because they can't break that barrier. Now this person, this quote that I just gave you, in more or less the terms that he gave it to me, tells you why I needed to keep these anonymous, right? Because he was being very honest in what he's seen, okay? And I loved the fact that he said it wouldn't stop someone from getting a job, but it may change the tone of the writer's room. And I agree completely with Andrea that that would be a good thing in a lot of instances. Yeah. But there are also people, I mean, on the program that I was able to observe, I was very, very fortunate to do that. One of the best showrunners in the business ran that show. And she made sure that when she cast her show, she had different ethnic, different religious, different everything. So she really worked for diversity, because she wanted disagreement in that room based on what people know and have experienced. And she had a great room.
Yeah, and that's actually smart, because then you can get a bigger audience, maybe.
Yeah.
Because it includes more people.
Yeah, people can relate better.
Yeah.
Yeah, people can relate. Okay, more comments, discussion.
There you go.
Can you talk just a little more specifically from your experience about the actual process? So is it, for an episode, for example, is it, an initial idea pitching, and then it goes back to the comment stage, to note stage, and so forth? Can you just describe that process in a little more detail? Time frames, how they do it, who does what, those kinds of things.
Okay, could you just tell us more specifically about the process, the time, who does what, and what happens then?
Okay, I'll give you the example of the show that I observed. And again, it varies so much. I mean, I keep saying that, but it does. The first, they have the idea of where the episode needs to get to. Okay? And the group of writers will meet in the room. Let's say we'll do this on a week schedule, okay? So they'll meet in the room on Monday and Tuesday, let's say, and they will break the episode down, right? And it is hard work, and it goes on and on and on until they get it to a place where they say, okay, this can work, right? Then the showrunner, whose ever turn it is to write the script, the showrunner will then start giving the assignment to that particular person or that partnership. Okay, there may be two people working together, writing partnership. And
is that something that the showrunner decides, okay, you two guys work together, or is it kind of like,
no.
we're this couple that are always working together?
You and I are writing partners. We go to
different shows.
Yeah. And you get half the pay and I get half the pay.
Yeah. Sounds like a good deal.
You get two minds for the price of one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a very good thing. So where were they? So I forgot where I was.
So more specifically about the process, then they go.
Yes.
So they have the arc, the characters,
And they give the
Yeah.
episode to a writer.
Yes. And they sit down and they have whiteboards all around, right? Usually whiteboards. And somebody, usually the person in charge, right, is writing down everything, all the beats, everything that they need to do for that show. Okay? And then they talk about it, and they erase things, and they change things, and they decide that this person can't do that, whatever. So they have certain parameters that they have to work within. Maybe they have to give an episode to a particular actor because that person is contracted for a certain number of episodes, whatever. They may be limited by budget. That can really sort of help shape a story. If you don't have any more money to do all these location shoots on this drama, right? So you have to, what set do we have? Well, we have this set, we can use that. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. The showrunner may or may not be in the room for all of that, right? And by, let's say, Tuesday, they have a script, or they have a beat sheet that can then go to the studio and to the network. They get notes on that. Maybe.
And how long does that take, the notes getting back?
Well, it depends, but it's pretty fast. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty fast process. It has to be, right? The notes might not be written notes. The notes might be over the phone, right? So, yeah. And so they get the notes back on that. They're keeping, it may go back to the room to talk about some of those notes, because some notes you want to do and some notes you don't want to do, and that's the whole negotiation thing, right? So something that's really important to the studio or really important to the network, you're probably going to do if it doesn't wreck the show, right? But they'll give you other things that maybe aren't so important because they're important to the writer, right? So it's back in the room, right? They're working on this, they're trying things out, whatever. This is kind of a back and forth, all right? I don't know how much detail you want or what. Stop me if I'm not saying what you need me to talk about, all right? Because I'm just interpreting what you're asking. And then what happened on the show that I saw was that first script the showrunner took and put it through her own typewriter, right? Went through all of it. Now, she had, again, you know, one of the downsides of getting this, you know, diverse and, you know, also diverse skill set, like, you know, from really young writers all the way up to the skilled writers. Maybe some of those writers can't deliver the script in a form that can actually fly. So for a lot of the writers, she rewrote a lot. For some of the writers, she didn't rewrite hardly anything. Now, what kind of grammar is that? She didn't rewrite hardly anything. Right? It's bad. Anyway, so yeah.
It's
so
mostly non-English speakers. So it's fine.
Never say that.
Don't point it out.
Yeah, never say that. And then the script would go to the actors, and they do a run-through with the studio and the network. And that is really kind of fun because they just sit around and they, you know, talk about it. And let's see, they go through the script, then everybody goes, it's actually kind of funny, this was a kind of funny situation, but they go through the run through, they're all sitting around a big table, right, with all these people standing around and listening and writing down notes on what all the actors are saying as they're reading their lines and whatever. Then the studio, the network, the showrunner, and possibly the writer go into another room and close the door, right? And talk about all the things that worked and did not work on that particular show. Right? And it is, you know, the show that I was on, things were fine. You know, usually there, you know, the shows that I saw, there weren't a whole lot of changes, but I imagine that there are times that there are a lot of changes. Okay, a person can't read a line well. A person doesn't want to read a line well, which is interesting. You know, actors can, you know, they don't want to say that, so they say it terribly, and you have to change the line. You know, yeah. So, anyway.
But do the actors, they have to say the lines they get normally? Or do some actors with really much power
some
get
actors,
to like change the lines?
You know, it's not that they get to change the lines, but you better give them what they want, kind of thing. You know, at least to the extent that you can. You know, yeah, but they don't like just get to willy-nilly change everything.
No.
Yeah.
What happens with their careers when they turn 45? What do they do?
Yeah.
What is their sort of dream? I guess they want to be showrunners also.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the question was about age. What happens with the writers when they get older? They want to be showrunners, or they're just pushed away? Or
Well, you hope that you've created enough of a network and enough of a reputation that your friend, the showrunner, is going to hire you on the show. You might do freelance work. I want to just make sure that I comment on something that you said. Not everybody wants to be a showrunner. A lot of people just want to write, and that's what they want to do, and they don't want to do all this managerial stuff.
and
right?
it sounds like that's a lot. I mean, being in contact with all the different departments,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it has to be a lot of administrative
Yeah,
work.
it's a lot. And the showrunners told me that it's the most difficult job in the world and the best job in the world. So the people who do it and are good at it love it. Okay? But not everybody wants to do that. So I did talk to a lot of writers who are over 40. You know, in comedy, do you write drama or do you write comedy? Comedy. Okay. Well, the reason that they tell me that age is a problem in comedy is that people think that you need to be funny on the level of a 15, 16-year-old, and somebody who's 22 is likely to be funnier to that 15 or 16-year-old. So I don't know, but there are older writers in comedy as well. I think some of the best comedies have older writers. You know, so I don't know what to tell you. It's not like you just go off the map when you hit 40 and, you know, nobody talks to you
There's still
anymore.
hope.
Yeah. It's just that what people are feeling is that it's harder and harder for them to get jobs when they hit 40 and there was also, this is just tangential to what you said, but one of the women who writes comedy and is over 40 said to me that people have told her, men have told her, well, women just aren't funny. And she has heard that a lot. Women just aren't funny. And how do you work against that? I don't know. You talk about Lucille Ball. You talk about Carol Burnett. I don't know. I mean,
Tina Fey.
Yeah, Tina Fey. Yeah, I mean, Tina Fey's done a lot for women writers, I think. So anyway, does that answer your question? I mean, there's not really a good answer to that, except that people do still work, but it's just harder to get jobs. But if you're excellent at what you do, you know, that helps.
Mikael, you had a question.
Have you been able to be part of or observe the audition process for the writing?
Yes.
How does it work? How does it
Oh, the audition.
between the different shows?
The audition for, you mean like writers being hired?
One of the writers in the room.
That the showrunners, when they hire the writers,
No,
when they put together the group.
No, I've seen the auditions that the writers have done for actors in particular episodes, but I haven't. You know, it's not really that they don't come in and audition in that sense. They will send in their work, and if the showrunner wants to see them, they will see them. But usually, the showrunner has contacts and knows who they want, or may call somebody else and says for a recommendation. So it's all kind of a networking kind of thing. You know, the network is really strong. You need to break into that network.
And it's
to be
interesting
part of
because
it.
you talked about that it's not only the skills, it's very much about personality and getting the right group of
Yes.
people to write.
Yes, yeah. And, you know, showrunners gave me examples of things that were bad. One was he brought in a friend that is a good writer, but he was a friend and he wanted to talk to him and give him a chance to work on this. It was a sitcom, but with sort of serious undertones. So the guy comes in, the friend comes in and says, "Hey, so-and-so, how you doing?" And they sit down. And so the friend thinks, just because we're friends, I'm going to get this job.
Mm.
And the writer had not done any research on the show that he was going to be hired for or not, had not really done anything that would impress his friend, the showrunner. So his friend, the showrunner, did not hire him. People aren't going to carry you, right?
No, but you may get the first meeting.
Yeah, you may get the first meeting, but you better be prepared and know what that showrunner has done, what that showrunner's style is, what their voice is. Certainly, what the show is that you're trying to get into, right? So things like that will keep you from getting a job.
I wanted to ask you, is there a big difference between cable and networks? Did you interview both?
I interviewed people who worked for broadcast networks, who worked for cable networks. And the difference that I found from the point of view of the writers is that on cable networks they were paid a lot less, but they had a lot more freedom. Okay? To do what they wanted. So you see some programs on cable that you wouldn't see on broadcast TV, although that's kind of changing, I think, just from my point of view as a viewer. But people enjoy working for cable because of the freedom, but you don't get as large an audience, and you don't get as much money. But
you can get a lot of credibility.
But you get a lot of credibility, yeah. And that's also really important in Hollywood. You have to work on the right shows, right? And that, I think, is a little bit unfortunate.
But what are the right shows? I mean,
The cool,
It's also a matter of taste.
it's a matter of taste, but it's also a matter of
Because a show can be huge, but really crap.
yeah.
Like, I don't know, 2.5 Men, for example. I hate it, but it's really big.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how to approach that. I've got to think for a second. Yeah.
No, just
Yes,
what are the
taste-
right shows?
Taste is different, but there's the cool factor. So if you say you write for 2.5 Men, right, even though you might not agree that it's a great show, it's a good gig, right? It's a good show to be on. It says that you can write comedy.
But it's because it's so
yeah,
big.
It's because
Yeah.
it's so big. But the cool factor, on the other hand, can be shows that are small, have small audiences, but are really critically acclaimed. Okay, or something like if you work. There's a show called Dexter. Have people
Yeah.
seen Dexter? All right. Now Dexter is a really, I mean, it's an acquired taste. Would you not say? It's not something that everyone can watch and enjoy. But Dexter is a cool show because it's so different, right? It's taking chances, right? I have tried to avoid the word edgy in everything that I've said because I hate it. The other one is pushing the envelope. It's like, what does that mean? I'm pushing the envelope. And then it falls off the table, all right? I mean, what does that mean? But that also factors into it, you know, something that kind of takes language a little bit too far and uses profanity, or you know, more graphic sex scenes, which I think are really stupid. I mean, like the audience doesn't know what's going on. You have to actually really show it, right? But that's something that's edgy. Okay, so sometimes those kinds of shows are getting more respect among writers. Okay, and I mean that's what I have seen in my interviews. And I forgot the original question. What was the original question? Before you said
What
crap.
are good shows? Credibility.
Yeah, good shows. Yeah.
So,
Other comments, or are we out of time, or I took my watch
no,
off?
we're not really
good.
out of time, but we could slowly start
Good.
moving
Yes.
forward. Please go ahead.
One final question, actually. So, I mean, Hollywood is one thing, but are there, from your work, are there aspects of the room, those processes, structure that you think are transferable to, you know, to other markets or circumstances? And can you talk about, can you identify those, even if we're talking about smaller budgets, basically?
Wow. Can elements, all right, so basically what you're asking me is, what are the good elements of the writer's room that people might want to adopt?
Here, for example.
Yeah, okay. That's a really good question. I think the showrunner structure is a good one. I think showrunners should not just be hired onto shows because they're hot. They're the hottest writer or whatever. They need to have managerial experience. I think one of the things that Hollywood is learning, and not just I think, I know that one of the things that Hollywood is learning is that you can't just take an excellent writer and make them a showrunner, because they need there's certain skills that they may not have learned yet, and they're starting. The Writers Guild is behind this. That they're starting training programs for potential showrunners, so that they can learn those skills. And I think that's something that if you start out with that, you're way far ahead of the game. So that's one of the things. I think let's see. I think coming up with good story is an excellent reason to use a writer's room. Okay? Story and character. And I think you can develop a lot when all these smart people are working together. I'm not so sure about comedy. I think comedy rooms have gotten too big. And then there's too much nonsense in comedy rooms. So I think I don't have an answer for how do you fix a comedy room or how do you make a comedy room work best in a different culture.
If you would say, for example, the number of writers, if you have a limited budget, maybe you can't have 10 writers that's on the payroll. What would be like the ideal amount?
Well, I mean, for comedies, they usually have 8 to 10.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was told. I mean, it can go up to 22. One comedy had 22 writers.
Wow.
And they all got T-shirts with numbers. Like 1 through 22. Right?
Everyone wants the number 1 T-shirt.
Yeah, but I think I think I need to think about that a little more to see if I can come up with more, because the answer to your question is in other data that I have, I think, that I haven't really talked about. But what do you see from what I've just presented? What do you see as the benefits in your culture? I don't know where you're from.
I'm a US-based scholar of Nordic film, so I was just asking. I mean, it seems like you've identified many factors that go into successful creative processes across industry or across.
Yes.
So,
I see. Okay. All right. Well, have I answered your question, Lee, so far? Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah, it's very difficult, especially since I don't know the Nordic culture very well, to tell you what would transfer. But anyway.
Okay,
There's
maybe
a couple more.
Yeah, couple very short questions. First, the lady here.
I wonder about the director's impact and how do you take care of the visual storytelling?
What about the director's impact and how do they take care of the visuals?
In
aspect of
television,
story?
the director has a very different job than in film. Directors might only be on for one episode, might be on for a lot of episodes. They work very closely with the showrunner. And the showrunner usually, I mean, hopefully the showrunner is working with directors that he or she has worked with before. And that was the case on the show that I observed. And they knew each other very well. They knew what they wanted. And the director was actually involved in the show from its conception all the way through, and that's really good. So the visual impact of the show, is that what you're talking about? You want to know? Yeah. I mean, it's in the director's hands, but a good showrunner will know what she wants and be able to communicate that to the director. But the directors, yeah, I'm going to leave it.
Would you say that the directors are more kind of like a hired hand in TV?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you bring on a director for one episode or two episodes, yes, they're a hired hand. But you and again, on the show that I observed, you had one director who was there all the time. Some episodes might be done by other people, but his
or her
vision was, well, in this case it was a he.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I can tell you a funny. If we have time, I'll tell you a funny story about a director thing. But, all right. Does that address it? Yeah. But the director, I mean, in TV, the writer is king, right? The writer has control. In film, the director is king, but the writer is king.
Okay, let's have one final
one more
question. I think I'm gonna give it to the guy over there because you already had one, Mika. Yeah, you're getting it. I was just saying to Mika that's fine.
Make it count.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, can you give an example in a room with 8 to 10 writers?
Yes.
With big diversity and everything, how do they ensure progress? Because I guess it doesn't go 8 times as fast as the showrunner or themselves. How do they make this stall in the whole process of writing when that many people have opinions? How do they make the progress into actually delivering all the stuff they have to do?
Yeah,
the question was about keeping the pace even though it's a lot of people involved.
Yeah, that's again the showrunner's job, but one thing I found is that they just stay there till it's done. And if that means working all night, they'll work all night. But it's the showrunner that really has to keep that in check. Yeah.
Is that why you think there's too many that it's small?
Well, I don't think, I think it becomes a free-for-all at 22. I mean, that's just too many voices. Yeah. And I'm not sure, I didn't actually observed that show, so I'm not sure how they organized all of that. They probably had different rooms that they sent groups off to do different things. Like, okay, you work on this scene, you work on these jokes, you work on this. But yeah, it's up. The showrunner has to control it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Patricia.
Sure.